right, guys, I'm now joined by John Bardis, who is going to be the team leader for the men's Greco-Roman wrestling team as we're prepping and getting ready for the 2021 Summer Olympic Games. John, how's it going?
Doing great, Chael. How about yourself? Thanks for having me.
I've never been better, and I will tell you there's never been a time, and I mean this literally, there's never been a time, it's been a better time to be a wrestling fan, at least for me, and it's just because of the competitiveness, and it's particularly this country, and when you look at freestyle, you look at the women, you look at Greco-Roman, in all fairness, John, we're going to have world medals, some of which are going to be gold, that aren't even going to make the team. That's how competitive it is.
So true. In fact, you and I have talked about this in the past. We've both been around American wrestling for a long time. It's both of our origins. Many MMA fighters, Daniel Cormier, Randy Couture, Henry Cejudo, and to go on, Ben Askren and others have made their original mark in American amateur wrestling. And I've never seen it like this before, including Gable's team in 1972, which was a pretty darn good team, right? The only matchup I can remember at the trials way back when that had anywhere near the consequence of 5 of our kids in 3 of our weight class was Don Beam and Rick Sanders, who wrestled off at 125 and a half. Both were silver medalists in Mexico City. On our men's freestyle team, which each weight class will have 16 competitors who went through the gauntlet just to make it to the Olympic trials. You've known that. We both wrestled in the trials. It's hard to get there. In 3 of those weight classes out of the 6, there are 5 athletes who between them in this last cycle have had 13 world and Olympic championships, which I've never seen before. I don't know of 13 athletes who between them 5 athletes who between them ever had 13 world and Olympic golds in a cycle, or frankly, in 2 cycles. It's really an extraordinary time.
Yeah, John, and there's always 2 sides of that, right? Like, you have the side of the team. The team is going to be iron on top of iron. We're going to have a great team. And that's great for you and I, the fan. But that's tough if you're one of the competitors. I mean, when you look at some of the opportunity or the opportunities that are going to be taken, it's tough. You know, Kerry Colott had made an argument, and he was discussing why some of the U.S. teams are as good as they are. And Kerry Colott said he believes it's because the guys stuck around. For example, when Randy Lewis is the Olympic champion, but he sticks around to make John Smith better. Or, you know, Jake Varner would be a fine example where he stuck around to make Kyle Schneider better. I mean, it's one of these things where there's 2 ways to look at it. Some of it's very sad for me. As a fan, I look at it very sad. But the fan of me also looks at it and goes, John, this is our most legitimate shot at bringing home more medals and more championships as a country than we've ever had in wrestling.
Well, I agree with you. And first of all, it's the toughest sport in the world. It's not only the oldest sport in the world, it's the toughest. And why would that be true? Well, first, every nation can afford to do it. And we're talking about nations that are ancient, and the sport for them is ancient. And it's always been the toughest people that are in those countries who've committed to the disciplines necessary to become an international wrestler. I mean, look, you look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? He's unbelievable. Maybe when it's all said and done, we'll be in that handful of names to be considered one of the greatest mixed martial artists ever. Putting that in perspective, he wouldn't make the top 5 on the Russian national team as a freestyler. That's nothing against him. It says everything about Russia, which and who is the best international program in the world, right? Both freestyle and Greco. Our freestyle teams go back and forth in any given year. We're one, they're one. But that's how hard it is. And furthermore, if you look at almost any other sport, let's talk basketball, baseball, football, unbelievable athletes, soccer, right? If you're the second best person in a country, you're a millionaire, right?
Yep.
You know, if you can't start for Tampa, you're definitely going to be starting for the Bears. You have a job. In this case, number 2 goes home, literally goes home, right? I mean, they'll stick around and be a part of a camp because, to your point, it's part of the culture to help that individual who made the team win a medal. But you're not on a team anymore. You're not carrying the flag. You're not an Olympian. You're either the guy or you're not on the team.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Khabib's name. I'll give you a great story, but I was cutting weight in the same sauna as Khabib. And, you know, you're cutting weight in a sauna. You're just zoned out on minding your own business. And this is before Khabib was Khabib. He was an undefeated fighter, and he had the weird hat, but he wasn't the world champion, a real famous guy. But Khabib had made a comment to somebody else. He said, I live in a village, and he's from Dagestan. He said, I live in a village that has 3,800 people. 18 of them are Olympic champions. And so it's just one of those things where that specific region, it's almost expected of them. This greatness and this toughness that you talked about, but it's almost expected. It's a very hard thing to relate to, but that was a very fascinating comment by Khabib, who went on to be a world champion himself.
No doubt. Yeah, an unbelievable athlete. I think in terms of a 5-round, 5-minute championship fight, he's the best wrestler that's ever been in the cage, right? This guy knows how to wrestle for 25 minutes, right? Most matches don't last that long. He's just got so much going for him. But having said that, we've got the likes of Jordan Burroughs, who's a 4-time world champion and a former Olympic champion, who's got Kyle Dake in his weight class, and Kyle is a 2-time defending world champion. We've got Jaden Cox, who's a 2-time defending world champion in the same weight class with the youngest Olympic and world champion America has ever had, Kyle Snyder, who has 2 world championships and an Olympic championship. And in Kyle's case, or Jaden's case, depending upon who's representing the team, they will arguably have to compete against who many believe today to be the greatest pound-for-pound freestyle or Greco-Roman wrestler in the world, and that's Abdul Rashid Sadulayev. Sadulayev has 4 world titles, 2 junior world titles, a world silver medalist, and was Olympic champion at the weight class below in Rio. And he is not just the real deal, he's exciting and extraordinary to watch. That's one weight class.
Yeah. No, that's one way. Hey, you could keep going. I thought maybe you were. We haven't even brought up the gentleman from Azerbaijan. I mean, we're going to talk that weight class. We could be here a while. Let me ask you this, though, John. You're going to be the team leader, okay? So you're gonna look at everything, take everything in, let the team play out who it is. But one of the things that you've done in your leadership role is to set up a mentoring program where some of the veterans, some of the guys who have been there can come and give back. And part of that giving back is to share what they did right. Part of it is to share the mistakes. Don't step on this landmine. As you see that mentorship program, I was just hoping, could you speak? We have a lot of wrestlers that are watching now that are going to hear about this and hear what they have to look forward to if they make the team. Could you just speak a little bit about this?
Oh, you bet. First of all, I'm real proud to say that USA Wrestling stepped up in a big way here on this idea. And today we have 2 captains of this mentorship team, which is 35 former Olympians and world team members. You're one. And by the way, thank you very much for being part of it. Your history is hugely important to us, and your ability to articulate what the sport means is very important to us, not just today, but to tomorrow and everything else that we do. The 2 co-captains are Wayne Bachman, a 2-time Olympian and many-time world team member, and Jay Robinson. Jay Robinson was Olympian in 1972. As many know, he was there for 15 years, and I think 11 of the Iowa national championships as head assistant coach. And then he went on to Minnesota to win 3 national titles, built the J-Rob camps that he put 40,000 young men through over a period of 30 years. Jay, over that period of time, spent 17 years living in a dormitory to assist other kids in having a better life through the J-Rob camps. Think about spending 17 years of your life in a dormitory because you were teaching kids wrestling camps. That's who he is. By the way, most people may not be aware of this. Jay is also an Army Airborne Ranger. He was in Vietnam, and he will openly say that include being on an Olympic team and being on national championship teams, of which he was a national champion at Oklahoma State. He was an Olympian. He said the toughest thing he's ever done in his life was Ranger School. But those are our 2 captains, and it just so turns out both were also in the military. So we have the likes of Rulon Gardner, yourself, Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, the list goes on, of great athletes who were Olympians and world team members and medalists, who also, in a couple of your cases, were very successful at the world championship level and the top level of the UFC. So these mentors, we are hoping, will be great communicators with these kids, both on a personal level as well as the technical things you point out. What things do we have to look out for? What do you have to pay attention to as you're preparing for the games? How do you manage things as simple as your diet? what's going on with you personally matters a whole lot before a competition like this. So getting under the hood of finding out what this young athlete needs and making sure that this group collectively comes together to provide for those. So those are just examples of that. But we have some extraordinary people who agreed to be part of this movement.
And John, Dana White has been asked a number of times, why do you think the UFC has done so well? Why do you think mixed martial arts caught on so quickly? And Dana's openly said, because people understand it. No matter what language you speak, you could turn that TV on to mute. You're going to understand. You understand a struggle. You understand two guys trying to win. You understand that there's a time frame and somebody's hand comes. You just understand fighting. And I have maintained, John, and I know that you agree with me, everybody who's an MMA fan that's a UFC fan is a wrestling fan, but they might not know it yet. They might not yet know that they love wrestling and the intricacies and seeing, when you bring up the names like Khabib or the names like St. Pierre, seeing the wrestling tactics that are invoked in martial arts. If you are a fight fan, you're a wrestling fan, but you might not know it. Will you help me to explain that to people? I mean, right, because you can understand wrestling as well. You're trying to get on top. You're trying to expose a guy. We're not overly confusing, are we?
No, but at the same time, the things that you learn and the things that you learned when you were a young guy coming up the ranks from being a kid forward, right? You learn natural reflexology in space that only a wrestler or somebody who is in close quarter combat understands. What was important for a kid catching a baseball from 50 yards away and watching rotation and understanding how the arc of the ball moves is an example of the secondary motion understanding that a wrestler has, right? You understand and see, you have a sixth sense for everything going around the 360 of your head. You can feel it, you see it, spatial relationships. So these young guys coming up the ranks learned about fighting and combat in close quarters from the time they started this. When you watch the John Smiths of this world, the Leroy Smiths of this world, the Petersons, the Gables, and so forth, their secondary reactions are all about combat. They understand where the force is coming from. They understand where the movement is coming from. They know what to do to protect themselves. And so you're right. Anybody who understands and sees combat sports is really a wrestling fan, because the foundational activities around close quarter combat really are built off of wrestling. And what Dana White has figured out how to do, right, is to make this a sport now that is recognized by households, not just individual fanatics like you and I. And that's changed the way people have looked at the sport. And it wouldn't shock me at all in the future if mixed martial arts at some point in time is an Olympic level sport, because it's becoming very widely accepted.
Sure. And, as the trials are coming up, by the way, now I get Olympic fever, John. I think you feel it too, but I mean, there's a special energy. There's something going on. It only comes around every 4 years. So it is special, but I see the athletes get bit by the bug. We'll have one of these old dogs, if you will, come back, and he's going to make a run and he's going to try to do it. But we also see the other side of the coin, a Jake Deichler type, somebody that's off the radar, somebody that's seeded number 9 or 10 or with how to seed it all. They always come in, always, and they go all the way to the top. The team gets disrupted by some young guy somewhere with a dream that happened to believe in himself, happened to show up at the right time. One thing that I feel that we learn from wrestling is success is 80% just showing up. I mean, you've got to be there in the moment. You have to be willing to put it on the line. You got to be willing to risk it. But if the work was there and you show up, and I feel that it's a lesson in life that kids can take with them everywhere. You're going to get the job, particularly if you're the one standing there willing to do it. It's an opportunity that we see in mixed martial arts, but it's also something special about wrestling.
No doubt. I mean, look, I can honestly say in my own life, it was the difference maker in many ways, because when you're doing something new in your life, you're not quite sure what your skill level is. But the one thing wrestling teaches you to do is to absorb pain and to be able to go harder and longer and longer and harder than the average person walking down the street. And we've seen these stories replay themselves over and over again in the sport. Like, for example, Henry Cejudo. Hey, Henry Cejudo had to beat a defending Olympic silver medalist to get on the team. He was a 20-year-old kid, and this was not just anybody. This was Stephen Abbas. And it was a 3-match war, because when we get into the finals to make the team, what is it? It's 2 out of 3. You think you've made it through the tournament and things are going good and you're in the finals? You got to strap it on for 3 goes. And those were 3 brutal goes. And over again, we see these young people and old people emerge and make a team. Mo Lawal said it well because of his background in mixed martial arts. And he said this about world-class level wrestling. And he said, if you haven't been wrestling at the world level for 6 months, he said, you ain't world-class anymore. And that was from a guy who finished 5th in the world at the senior level in wrestling. So yeah, it's that hard. It's that gruesome. You mentioned Jake Deichler. He was on the team I happened to be the team leader on in '08. Who does he beat? He beats the best guy we got. To this day, one of the 5 best wrestlers I've ever known in my life is Harry Lester, right? Harry Lester, I believe, could have made the freestyle team. He was 2-time defending bronze medalist in that world cycle. And he's wrestling a high school kid and loses, right? Because this kid that day wanted it more, was on. Harry may not have been on. And that's it. It's game, set, and match. Harry goes home. Jake Deichler goes to Beijing.
Sure. Hey, he not only Harry Lester, I remember Deichler had Oscar Wood that day, but that was a very big deal. Oscar was the Olympian and went through Bracken to get it. I just remember that. I really appreciate that you brought him up, because when you do hear some of those stories, I mean, at one point that was Cejudo. Cejudo is a household name now, but at the time he skipped over the college. He went right into the ranks, become the youngest Olympic champion ever. We were seeing signs of that from Aaron Pico. Pico shifted a little, but some of these guys that have a focus, John, and there's something to the naiveness of some of these young guys. They don't know they don't belong. They don't know that you can't go beat a grown man when you're still a boy. You can't do it. Some people don't tell them, and you watch this happen, and it really inspires me. It just reminds me of what I already know to be true, but sometimes I do need reminded. Anything's possible. And if you put yourself in the best position and you think positively and you focus on your strengths, you can win.
Amen. Well, look at Roland Gardner, right? He wrestles in the finals of the Olympic Games in 2000. Somebody that had never lost, ever, Karelin, right? And you could have made a bet on that from anywhere in the world with enormous odds favorable to Karelin, right? You could have bet any amount of money that Roland Gardner was not going to win, and anyone would have taken that bet. And who does he beat? He beats a 13-time world and Olympic champion. Karelin was going for his 4th Olympic gold, which is crazy, right? We're talking about you got to actually make the team for 15 years.
Right.
Right, the Russian team for 15 years. Forget winning. He's won the world championship, up to that point in time, I think 9 times, and he's going for his 4th Olympic gold, which is just crazy. So having a young guy from Wyoming doesn't look like Karelin. Karelin looks like he was cut straight out of a Russian piece of granite. Roland looked like sort of a big guy, came off a farm, which he did, and he beats him, right? And so that's what this idea, I think, is all about in combat sports, which is, look, we at the end of the day, right, there's going to be a fight, and at the end of the day, there's going to be a wrestling match. And what's going to be pretty exciting about it is that you can't put a particular value on the will of another human being, but we see time and time again what somebody who decides against what anybody else's opinion is, what they're willing to do.
Sure. Yeah, and it always seems like conditioning, by the way, but that's always been a real advantage to America, John. I argue that's largely because of our collegiate systems. I argue that going a 6-minute match in high school where stalling's a real thing and you don't get to stay on bottom. You must get up or you must hold a man down against his will. Graduating into college, same rules, but now 7 minutes. I've always thought that was a leg up, and it's an intangible. It's an intangible that the audience has a hard time seeing. But you talked to me about this a lot in my mixed martial arts career. But when you can weaponize pace the way a Dan Gable did, a Randy Couture, a George St. Pierre, when you can weaponize pace, you're bringing to the fight something the audience can't always see. And when people talk about heart and mental toughness and grit, those are largely fancy words for pace. How hard can you go? Is my harder harder than your hard?
I agree with that. Gable is the greatest of all time, right? I honestly believe that if Dan had decided to wrestle in 2 or 3 more Olympics, he'd have won them. And I'll give you a story about that. So my college roommate at Wisconsin ended up being the last person to beat Dan, and that was Lee Kemp. But I'll tell you another story about Gable. So I walk around weighing about 175 pounds, right? Dan walks around, I think, weighing somewhere around 165, just to put that in perspective. In 1996, I'm at the games and I'm talking to one of the alternates on the team whose name is Joel Sherritt. You know Joel.
Of course.
And Joel ended up being head coach of the Naval Academy. He was a two-time NCAA champion. And at that point in time, I think the weight class in college was 198. Does that sound right? I mean, the weight classes have changed a little bit on pounds. But he was also alternate on the 96 team, right? He was in his early mid-20s when he was alternate on the 1996 team. To put this in perspective, Gable at that point in time was 47 years of age, walking around at about 165 pounds. Sherritt disclosed to me that he had never beaten Gable and couldn't beat him now, right? So you have a two-time defending NCAA champion, alternate on the Olympic team at 198 pounds, who says he can't beat a 47-year-old coach. And that's killer to me. But everybody I knew who saw Gable practice said the same thing. Barry Davis, Olympic silver medalist, Olympic world medalist, three-time NCAA champion, saw Randy Lewis challenge Gable to a match in the Iowa wrestling room after Lewis had won the gold medal. So he was pretty good, right?
Sure, yeah. Lewis was pretty good, yes.
He was pretty good. And this is in 1985, right? So at that point, Dan is approximately 36 years old, and he's wrestling the Olympic champion. And Randy right away takes Gable down. And I said, well, how did it turn out? And he said, 24-4. Gable beat him 24-4.
Wow.
And said that Randy didn't want the match to go any further because the one thing about Dan, to your point, is the tyranny of his pace also allows him to use his power in ways once he breaks you that you don't want to be there anymore. And that's been true of the great pace athletes in mixed martial arts. It's been true of the great pace athletes at the collegiate level. It's been true of the great pace athletes at the international level, right? They get you to a point in time, and I don't care how tough you are, once your cardiovascular system and your neuromuscular system is broken, you're broken, right? So you better do everything you can and have enough fear in your heart before that point in time comes that you've tested yourself to figure out what that looks like.
John, I got to tell you, I just love that Gable story that you just told because I've heard stories that John Smith was very similar, and I heard that right from Jamil Kelly. Jamil said actually about himself, I finally got Coach Smith, but that was just before the 2004 games, and that was what gave Jamil confidence to go out and bring home that silver medal when he never placed in the NCAA, just by example. I hear these wonderful stories. Now, I'm going to do to the audience what's called a tease, but under your leadership, we are going to make sure that some of these matches and some of these instances are captured. We're going to bring this year the audience along for the ride. We're going to make sure that wrestlers who are the toughest guys also become the most accessible Olympians. We're going to welcome the fans in. We're going to take questions. We're going to make sure that people realize as much as we look up to these heroes and as much as they're the toughest guys around, they're also very nice guys that appreciate a pat on the back and they appreciate some support. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to tease the audience a little bit, but you and I are going to be back. We're going to be bringing right here on themat.com. We're going to be bringing updates every Monday. All of you, tell a friend, tell somebody. John and I will see you all next week. John, any final words?
Just thank you, Chael. Appreciate your leadership. Appreciate you leading this process. And just to give you some sense for some of who these guys are, I'll just mention one, David Taylor.
Please.
David Taylor won the world championship in 2018. He beat the defending Olympic champion. His name is Yazdani. Just to put this in perspective, Yazdani not only hasn't lost a match since he won the Olympic Games in 2016, he hasn't had a match outside of David Taylor beating him twice that went the distance. He has tech-falled every other person in the world except David Taylor, who has only wrestled him twice, and both times David Taylor's pace has taken Yazdani out of the match and Taylor has won. That's the kind of athlete we're talking about, and that's the kind of athlete you're going to get a chance to show the rest of the country here in the next few months.
Absolutely. We're going to see what they do. We're going to hear how they think, what they feel. We're going to watch what they eat. We're going to watch them train, and we're going to show the world how great and special these wrestlers are. John, thank you very much. I will talk with you very soon.
Thanks, Chael.
Thanks, my friend.